Hi. Hey. It's all about the heart, isn't it? I mean, just about everything in life, it comes down to what's inside us, what really is the thing, what really is the issue. Last week we started this two-part series talking about the idea of, can you hear me now? And Jesus ended his message last week by saying, let him who has ears hear. Now he kind of shifts the way that he talks to the people, and he speaks predominantly in parables, and then he ends this parable with the same statement. Let him who have ears hear. How many of you have ears? If you have ears, would you raise your hand here? 2 or 3 of you have ears. Okay. Good. Of course, the point of the passage is ears in your heart, so to speak, because it's not so much the physical words. Of course you hear them. It's not so much the things that you see. Of course you see them. But the true issue is the matter of the heart. Do you hear and do you understand? And does it have an impact on your life? And does the truth result in fruit? Okay. Jesus was the master storyteller. Nobody could tell stories like Jesus could. When we get to chapter 13 of the passage today, Jesus changed the way he addressed people, because we talked about the Beatitudes when Jesus said, blessed, 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 blessed. And none of that was in a story form. He was just making statements. But now he's kind of changing the way he talks to people. And he changes because of the heart, because he knows what's in the heart. So he begins because he wants to address not just the ears or the mind, but he wants to address the heart. And so he changes the way he speaks, and he begins to tell stories. Stories. Don't you love a good story? I just love a good story. I mean, but for me, I want a story that has a purpose, that has something in it to share something to me. Kathy and I, we watched the first 10 minutes of many more movies than we ever watched all the way through. And the reason is because we want a story that has a message. I want somebody I can identify with, somebody that I can relate to, and if I don't get an adequate hero in the first 10 minutes, out it comes. Or off it goes, or changing the channel, because I'm not going to give an hour and a half of our time to a story that doesn't have any purpose whatsoever in our listening to it. So I want a story with a purpose. And Jesus, when he speaks to the crowds, he always has a purpose. And his purpose, his central purpose, is to address the hearts of people where they are. And in the parable of the sower, nothing new, you know the parable of the sower, he addresses people where they are. Some people have very hard hearts, and no matter what Jesus says, it's going to change their mind. Have you ever talked to anybody like that? I mean, they've already decided when they came what they're going to hear. There's nothing that you can say. I talked to a teacher after the last service who said, oh, man, I talk to people like that all the time. No matter what I say, they're not going to hear. Jesus knew all about that, teachers. He knows exactly what that's like. And that's a really encouraging thought for preachers too, by the way. Sometimes it doesn't make any difference how eloquent I am, and I'm pretty good. It doesn't matter how funny I am. I'm pretty funny. I'm a funny guy. It doesn't matter how poignant my message is or how powerful it is. Some of you have already decided. And there's nothing that I'm going to say that's going to change your opinion or that's going to reach down into your heart and change what you think. Some of you have already made that decision. That's just the way life is. And Jesus is faced with that. And so he's going to address those that have hard hearts. Well, he does that through the telling of a story. He does that because he wants to tell stories. The hard-hearted groups around him were increasing, and the receptive hearts were decreasing. He had fed the 5,000. He had healed the sick. He had touched lepers. He has performed incredible miracles, and a lot of people were coming to hear the miracles, see the miracles. Show us a sign, they said. Or please heal somebody. Do something. Show us a sign. Or they came to trap him and to trick him. to get him to say something that they could accuse him of later, which of course ended up, the hard-hearted ones ended up hanging him on the cross. But the crowds, now look at verses 1 through 3 of Matthew chapter 13. This is the introduction to the first parable. The same day, Jesus went out of the house and he sat beside the sea. And great crowds gathered about him, so that he got into a boat and sat down. And the whole crowd stood on the beach, and he told them many things in parables. Now, we will stand on that beach in June when we go to Israel. We'll be in a boat on the Sea of Galilee, and we'll come alongside with that beaches, and you can see the natural amphitheater and how he could speak out into the sea, and how he could speak, and people would hear him all around that incredible the valley where the Sea of Galilee is located. It's really a beautiful sight, and you understand how there can be such crowds. But I want you to notice the great crowds, the mega crowds, the whole crowd. Lots of people were coming, and lots of people were coming with different motives. Some of them were there, with the original hard heart. They were coming, and they were all over the place. But Jesus was never intimidated by the crowds. Jesus was never moved by how many people. He didn't care about how many. His message never changed. Matter of fact, he began to tell them stories and things to keep those that came for the wrong reasons from hearing anything. He didn't want them to hear, because he knew what was in their heart. Because it's all a matter of the heart. We could probably add 2 services to our church on Sunday. We can probably put more chairs all around. If maybe we could raffle off a new Corvette. If I had a new Corvette to give away every Sunday, we would have a lot more people here, and I'm sure I could get Sid Dillon to give me one. The general manager is sitting over here. I'm just planting a seed. No. Or if I got a Mercedes, nothing personal, but more people would come. But the point is, they would come for what they were going to get, would they not? You see, and the people who gathered, the great crowds, the incredible number of people came, but they came with the wrong heart. They came to get the draw of the ticket. They came for what they could get, not for what they needed. And so there were hardened hearts, and no matter what Jesus said, they're not going to hear it. And in the parable of the sower, then, he tells about the different kinds of people who he was addressing. These are the kind of people who are here. And this is how he addresses them in 13:10. But before we look at the parable specifically, let me show you why Jesus shifted to parables. Then the disciples came and they said to him, "Why do you speak to them in parables?" And he answered to them, "To you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given." Now, the kingdom of heaven is important to understand this. Matthew is the only one of the Gospels to identify believers in Jesus Christ as the church. Next week, when we look at Peter's miraculous profession of faith, he says, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus responds and says to him, "That's right, but you did not know this of yourself. This was given to you. This was revealed to you by God. And upon this rock, I will build my church." Now, I don't want to disillusion any of you, but he was not talking about Peter as a person. He was talking about the profession that he's going to build the mystery form of the kingdom. Paul uses the same word that's used here for secret, and it's translated in our English Bibles as mystery when he talks about the church. And that now the kingdom is comprised of not people born physically of Abraham. Now God's kingdom is composed of people who hear, whose hearts are open, they hear, they believe, and they receive Jesus Christ in their life. To you, you see, you got that. But to them, they don't have that. And then he goes on to say, "For to one who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even that what he has will be taken away." Isn't this the way it is with everything in life? I mean, the more you learn, the more you can learn. I mean, my Hebrew class, I'm teaching Hebrew on Monday nights, and people are really working real hard at getting it. But before they can look at the words and learn the vocabulary and the meaning of the words, they have to know the alphabet. And if you never heard the alphabet, you never learn the details of the language. If you never get those small little symbols, you'll never be able to understand the words. When you learn the alphabet, then you can build a vocabulary. And to you who have, more will be given. It's the way intellectually. It's that way physically. I mean, you build muscle. Let me show you. Well, let me get somebody else to show. Anyway, the point is, your muscles, when you work your muscles, they get stronger, and to whom have, more will be given, because you'll build more. But if you don't use it, they atrophy and they go away. Well, Jesus is making the point that the same is true about your faith. That faith must be exercised or it withers. There is some more, to whom has, more will be given. But to whom does not respond to this with the right heart, even what they have will be taken away. In Matthew 21, we're going to get to a passage where Jesus literally says to the religious people, the kingdom is taken away from you. He's going to make that statement. And it's going to be given to the Gentiles who believe in the Son of God. Very important point to understand here. So let me go on. Let me finish it. This is why I speak to them in parables. Because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. Indeed, in their case, the prophecy of Isaiah chapter 6, verses 9 and 10 is quoted. Every gospel writer quotes this passage, by the way. It's quoted in all the gospels. And Matthew here quotes it verbatim. I mean, literally verbatim from the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. Ooh, I get goosebumps. It doesn't mean very much to you. But the point is that Jesus quoted it verbatim from Isaiah, and it's so important to understand that he quotes it from Isaiah because Isaiah is the prophet who was called by God to go and speak to a people who have hard hearts and aren't going to hear you. Well, that's what I want. Or like Moses. God says to Moses, Moses, I want you to go and tell Pharaoh to let my people go. And by the way, Moses, when you get there, you're going to say, let my people go. And you know what? I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart so he won't listen to you. Moses says, wait a minute, let me see if I get this right. You're going to tell me to give me a message, and you're going to send me to go and tell them something, and they're not going to listen to me. And they're going to reject everything I say. Pharaoh's not going to hear a thing I say. He's going to fight. He says, that's exactly right. Isn't this so cool? No! I mean, this is not good. And he said, Moses, you missed the point. I am going to do something in Egypt that every generation for the rest of time will remember. I am going to do something in Egypt that is never, ever going to be forgotten because of the hardness of their hearts. Isaiah, go to the children of hard hearts and tell them this message. Unto you a child is born. Unto you a son is given. And the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be Wonderful Counselor, Almighty God, Prince of Peace. He will be Emmanuel, God with us. Because they reject, using their rejection, I am going to do something that's going to change the way you count your minutes of your day. I'm going to do something to change the way you number your years. I'm going to do something so powerful, Isaiah. Don't you get it? Don't you get it? By the way, this is a real encouraging thing for preachers. You know? I mean, God says, go out there and preach and teach that gospel. Give that gospel to everybody, and most of them aren't going to listen to you anyway. Most of you, most of the people you speak to, they're not going to hear it. That's real encouraging to see that there were... People fell asleep when the Apostle Paul preached. Eutychus, who fell off of the top thing, he fell asleep when the Apostle Paul preached. You would be stunned if I told you everything I see from the pulpit. You would really be surprised, and some of you would be really embarrassed. But I don't care. It's not a big deal. Some of you work all week long, and this is probably the first chance you have to sit down. You probably haven't stopped running, haven't stopped working all day, and this is the first chance that you've had to relax. Go ahead and sleep. Because I probably don't have anything that well to hear if you're not hearing God speak to you anyway. Because I can tell you all kinds of things. I can give you all kinds of, illustrations and stories. But if you're not listening for God, if you didn't come to hear God, it doesn't make any difference. And a lot of you have made up your mind when you came here that there's nothing that you're going to hear from God here. And some of you sit here right now, you've already decided there's nothing Chuck's going to say that's going to touch me. There's no passage that he's going to read that's going to move me. There's nothing there. Some of you are already like that. And Jesus knows exactly what that's like. And that's why he shifted to talking to parables. Because the issue is a matter of the heart. And so he addressed the people where they were in their hearts. So he moves on and he quotes from Isaiah, and he says, as he quotes this passage, "You will indeed hear, but you'll never understand. You will indeed see, but you'll never perceive. For this people's hearts have grown dull." I got a dull heart. Our hearts have grown dull. And with their ears, they can barely hear, and their eyes they have closed. Doesn't that sound like someone falling asleep? Okay. Lest they could see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their heart and turn, and I would heal them. That's why I speak to them in parables. I tell stories that have a purpose. And the purpose of the story will either elicit great excitement and passion from you, or it will turn you against me. That's what Jesus is saying to them. So we move on to the heart of the problem is a problem of the heart, of course. Well, by the way, do I have time for this? Probably not. In Deuteronomy, one of the most important texts of the Old Testament for the Jews? It's so important that when you're in Israel, they write it down, they roll it up into a little scroll, and they put it in this little square box, and they nail it to their doorposts in fulfillment of the passage. And it's such an important little passage of the Bible. It's Deuteronomy chapter 6. It's called the Shemach of Israel. And they put it in this little thing, and this little thing is called a mezuzah. I got it. A mezuzah. And in it contains this little scroll. We brought a bunch of them back from Israel. We nailed a couple of them to our door for a while because it was cool. But Deuteronomy 6, you know what Deuteronomy, it's called the Shemach because that's the first word of the passage. You know what Shemach means in Hebrew? Anybody. Hear. Hear, Israel. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with your whole heart, your whole soul, your whole mind, and your own strength. That's hear. It's a call for Israel to hear. The Shema. And they have this, hold this sacred. And Jesus comes and he says, let these who have ears to hear, let them hear. We've got a new thing coming. So, it's the same sower. It's the same seed, but it falls on different grounds. Let's take a look at these different grounds. The first one is a hard heart. Those whose heart is hard as dirt. Saying, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell along the path. And the birds came and devoured them up. According to one of Jesus frequently used these agricultural illustrations because he was in an agricultural economy, and people recognized them. One of the commentators I read said that they planted their fields in 3-row strips that went on almost unending through the whole field. But there was always a 2 to 3 foot path in between each row, because that's where the sowers, where the weeders, where the harvesters, and everyone would walk. They would walk on these paths. And these paths got worn solid, hard, and it was just like rock. And of course, so when he says, and the seed fell along the path and the birds came and ate it, they knew exactly what they're talking about. Jesus interprets the passage and he says, Shemach. Isn't this cool? Hear, then, the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. This is what was sown along the path. You see, the idea of the hardness of heart, they already understood, they already knew what they were going to hear, and the seed of the word that Jesus was planting would just bounce off. That would never change anything at all. It can't get through to a hard, unbreakable heart. The ground must be broken up. Isn't that good news? God will break up the ground before he sows. Those that come with heart, you know what a waste it is to plant seed in ground that is hard and that cannot receive? You know what a waste it is. Back in 1980, probably right around 1980, I had been a Christian a couple years, and I was recruiting for the Navy out of an office in Roseville, Michigan. There was 4 different branches there. There was myself, Navy, Marine Corps, Army, and an Air Force recruiter there. And the Marine Corps staff sergeant brought me in one of his recruits who had joined the delayed entry program a year before, but in the meantime, he was converted to Jehovah's Witness. The JWs are pacifists. They don't believe in military service. And so he needed to get out of his service. And so he came in a week before he was supposed to leave and says, I can't go. I am a religious objector. Now I can't do it. And so the staff sergeant Marine recruiter knew that this crazy Navy guy down in the inn had a Bible on his desk. He knew I was religious. He knew I had got religion. So he thought, well, I'll take him down to talk to this guy. And this guy will talk him into going in because he's a religious person and he still believes in serving the country. So I'll take him down to him. So the staff sergeant brought him down to me, and he sat next to me in my tent. And for 2.5 hours, I talked to the guy about the Bible, about the gospel, about what it was all about. And 3 or 4 times there, I offered the guy an opportunity to come to faith in Jesus Christ, not in the cultic figures that he followed. I offered him Jesus as his Savior and his Savior alone. But he had already made up his mind. For 2.5 hours we talked. It didn't do any good. He had already made up his mind, and he had decided he already knew everything. There wasn't anything I could say. Finally, I realized that, and the Marine Corps recruiter realized that, and he took him, and the guy never went. He ended up getting out of it because of the exemption. But I tell you, I was so frustrated. I was saying all the right things. I can really identify with Isaiah. You know, I said all the right things. I mean, I was a nice, gentle, my own humble, gentle self. You know, I did everything I could think of, and it did absolutely nothing. Well, Jesus faced that kind of hard heart, closed mind all the time. Not only did he face that, but he moves on now from the closed hearts to shallow hearts. And in 13:5 and 6, we talk about the second kind of seed. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil. And immediately they sprang up since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched. And since they had no root, they withered away. And again, Israel is very familiar with this imagery. If we're on our bus driving from city to city in Israel, you will see the rocky grounds. And every once in a while, you'll see this great green plush garden because they have reclaimed Israel. There's a movement in Israel called Reclaiming the Desert for God. And what they do is people come and they give them portions of land as long as they cultivate that land. And so you can be driving along with nothing but rock and dirt and emptiness, wilderness, and all of a sudden there's this great garden. You go on a little while and there's another great garden and then just rock. They knew this rock. They were very familiar with this rock. And they know what a waste of time it is to plant seed in it. So Jesus interprets the parable and he says, as for what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet he has no root in himself, but he endures for a while. But when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately he falls away. Have you ever known anyone like that? Who made a radical, emotional, excited profession of faith in Jesus and then went to work and realized how ridiculous they appear in the eyes of the world, and all of a sudden they begin to backpedal from that profession of faith? Or they experience a hardship that they thought that when they came to faith everything was going to be different now, God was going to bless them and take all the problems away from them. Ted Turner says, I was a Christian until he let my sister die. And I don't want nothing with a God that would let that happen. That's no profession of faith. What in the world is that? See, they have no heart. You see, the condition is inside. It's a heart. They came for the raffle. They came for what they could get. They came for a wrong purpose. And Jesus was speaking to them, hoping that somebody would see themselves and that they would understand, boy, you know what? That's me. It's a matter of the heart. Do you know what the emblem of the state, one of the emblems of the Israeli nation is? It's the burning bush of Israel. You know, the burning bush on Mount Sinai? Do you know that that burning bush was a miracle? Do you know why it was a miracle? Was it a miracle because it was on fire? No. By the way, that kind of combustion in the desert of the heat of the Sinai happened regularly. Did you know that? It wasn't that the bush was on fire that was the miracle. The miracle was that it wasn't consumed by the fire. Because when bushes go on fire, guess what happens to them? They get consumed. But Moses' statement is that it wasn't being consumed, so I had to go check this out. And so that burning bush became the emblem of Israel. No matter what happened, no matter what Egypt did to them, no matter what Hitler and the Holocaust did to them, no matter what a great symbol. You see, they withstood all the persecution, all the fires that life could put, and they are not consumed. The reformers, by the way, some of the early reformers also chose that. Many of them were burned to death at the stake, but their claim was that you may light us on fire, but our movement will never burn out. It will never be consumed. And the point is that there's a fire in the heart. There's a fire there that is going to be persevere through whatever persecution comes. It's going to stay. And it's it's the heart. It's your kind of heart. I went in to see my wife this morning before church. She was getting ready. I was getting ready. I went in to see my wife because I have to get her approval for what I wear most mornings. So I went in to say, do I look all right? Is this going to be okay for today? She said, sure. She was getting ready and she had the TV on. They were watching National Geographic. And it brought to mind instantly one of the Geographic series. It wasn't this one. It was one I'd seen before. And it brought to mind the National Geographic. How many of you have ever seen the cheetah chase down the antelope on National Geographic? Yeah, it's a pretty popular one. And I remembered that. The cheetah is the fastest animal on the planet. Did you know that? You know it can attain speeds of 70 miles per hour. The antelope, its primary prey, the African, I think it's called something else, but we'll call it an antelope. It is its primary prey. It can luckily get to 40 miles an hour, if it works hard. But this is interesting. Guess which one of these animals, the antelope or the cheetah, is an endangered species? The cheetah. Do you know why? The cheetah can attain 70 miles an hour, but it can only run at 70 miles an hour for 20 seconds because it's got the heart the size of a walnut. And if its prey can dodge and dart for 20 seconds, the cheetah will give up because it doesn't have a heart. Whereas the heart of the antelope, he can run full speed nearly all day long. You see, it's an issue of your heart. It's all about our hearts, what's inside. And the idea of perseverance is what Jesus is addressing here. And God says it's hanging in there and not being consumed. Number 3, the static of a preoccupied heart. Other seeds fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Ha 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 ha. Jesus interprets. As for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. Now, there's an interesting difference in this one. If I were to look at the progression of these 3 seeds being planted, I think we would see the hard heart that can't hear the message of the kingdom. The hard heart is one that can't be moved. It's already made a decision, especially about Christ, who Christ is, and don't expect me to ever change my opinion. The second heart, the one that is shallow, the one with no commitment, is one that has the wrong purpose and thinks that this idea of faith and this idea of Jesus Christ is something that's here to serve me. I have to what I can get from it. But this one, it changes because its end result here is that it proves unfruitful. And so there's this idea that this preoccupied hearts, there are a lot of people that have come to faith, like many of you, but you're still overwhelmed with a preoccupied heart, and no fruit of your faith comes forth because you're choked out by the cares of the world. You're overwhelmed by everything that's happening in your life, and you don't have time for God. Or you don't want to let go of some things in your life that keep you from being fruitful. You don't want to let go of certain pleasures, certain riches, certain practices, and you love them more than you love the message. Here, Jesus is saying, gee, I wonder if there's anyone like that in the crowd that Jesus was speaking to. I wonder if there's anyone like that here. You know? I'm just too busy for it. Or, there are too many other things out there I just can't let go of. Well, these are the seeds of the world. Jesus interprets them as the deceitfulness of riches. I could probably stand up here and preach forever, and you can have other people tell you forever and ever that the love of the world will never do you any good. Riches you can't take away with you. There is a deceitfulness of riches, and it will never touch you. You'll go out and choose to make the same value judgments that you always make. And the same is true with me. You see, Jesus tells us in John that we are not to love the world or the things of the world because they're no value. Don't love the world. But we do. We go out and we occupy ourselves with those things. The only hope we have, and Jesus knew this, and Jesus was trying to convince the people that they need to exchange the love for their particular choice for a greater love. It's a greater love that will wash out the love of the world, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, and the lust of the flesh. It's a greater love. Hear, O Israel, love the Lord your God with your whole heart, your whole soul, your whole mind, and your own strength. You won't have to worry about the others. Love God more than anything else. It's got to be replaced. And so Jesus goes on to close his message talking about the blessings of an open heart that get to hear these things. And he goes on, he says, as for what was sown on good soil, by the way, good soil is soil that's been tilled, that has been broken up. The clods have been broken up and it's ready to receive a seed. Good soil. This is the one who hears the word and understands it. And he indeed bears fruit and yields. In one case 100, in another case 60, and in another case 30. You see, the whole issue is the heart. Before God can reach us with the message of his kingdom that's established through faith in Jesus Christ, before he can reach us, he has to plow the ground. We have to have a broken heart. I told you about my story as a recruiter back in 1980 with the Jehovah's Witness. It's funny, I spent over 2.5 hours talking to that guy, and he went out, he got out of the Marine Corps. The next day, Staff Sergeant Honeycutt came into my office and sat next to my chair and said, My wife has left me. I listened to everything that you had to say, and I need Jesus Christ in my life. He prayed to receive Christ with me in that recruiting office in Roseville, Michigan, because you see, his heart had been broken. His heart had been opened, but not the other guy. That's the way it is with the message of Jesus Christ. Your hearts have to be opened. Your hearts have to be good hearts. Hear, O world. Jesus Christ died on the cross to pay the penalty for your sins. That has got to break your heart. He paid for what you did wrong on the cross of Calvary. All of that suffering that Isaiah describes in chapter 53, he was beaten beyond recognition. Blood ran down through the crowns. He was pierced for our transgressions. You see, God so loved the world that he sent his son into the world to pay the penalty for our sins so it would break our hearts. You know, you often hear me badmouth my Catholic heritage. No, I never do that. You've never heard me say anything. But I tell you one thing that I really appreciate the heritage that my parents went out of their way to give me. And there's some things that Catholics have right, I think. You know, if you look at a crucifix, Jesus is on it, and that should break your heart. It needs to break your heart. Sometimes the cross looks at Christ after the event, and he's not on the cross anymore. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying visualizing and seeing Jesus Christ on the cross should break your heart. That's why God sent him into the world, to soften our hearts, to be so important that the cares of the world will fall away. The deceitfulness of riches will not have a place anymore as you fall in love with the one who died for you. And believe me, unless God tells you that, unless you hear that directly from God, you're not going to hear it. God has to touch you. God has to break up the ground. God has to get you ready. And then God has to open your heart to receive it. I pray that you're there, that you've been there, or that you can be there. You can have good ground, and that the seed of the kingdom of God through faith in Jesus Christ is yours, and that to whoever has, to them more will be given. I pray that that's your case today. Would you pray with me? Father, you prophesy in the Old Testament that someday even the nation of Israel will stand before you and look upon the one they have pierced with broken hearts. They will mourn when they realize what they did to the Son of God. For you indeed are what Peter says. You are the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Lord, it's only when we open our hearts to that reality, it's only when we stop arguing against that truth, stop rationalizing it, humble ourselves before you, open our hearts and minds to receive that message, that we find the peace that passes understanding, that gives us the ability to grow in our faith and our commitment in our life, our walk. Lord, if there's anyone here who has not had that humbling experience of recognizing their sinfulness and knowing that they need Jesus Christ in their life, I ask you to move them accordingly. May they recognize the depth of their need for Jesus in their life. May they open their heart to him. And may you plant the seed. May that seed of the gospel find good soil and grow up good and strong. And then may it produce fruit 30, 60, or even 100-fold.